Mr. Nader, seconded by Mr. Eichitson, moves that the 31st report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts presented on Tuesday, November 7, 2023 be concurred in. Debate. The honour member for Perth-Wellington.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it is indeed an honour to rise in this House today to move concurrence on the 31st report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Now, Madam Speaker, why? Why is this important? Why should we be debating this motion? Because, Madam Speaker, this report refers to the Auditor General's report on chronic homelessness. And, Madam Speaker, this report is truly a damning report on the state of this government's actions to address chronic homelessness in Canada. And why does this matter? Why does a report like this matter to Canadians in my riding of Perth-Wellington and in ridings across the country? It matters because those experiencing homelessness in our community are real people. They are family members. They are brothers and sisters. They are sons and daughters. There's mums and dads. They're friends, and in some cases, they're co-workers. And those experiencing homelessness have been let down by this Liberal government. Now, Madam Speaker, I want to provide a little bit of local context in my riding of Perth-Wellington. Like many members, many colleagues in our official opposition, we spent the summer speaking with and interacting with many local families, stakeholders, and municipalities about what they were seeing on the ground in each and every one of our communities. I had the great pleasure to speak with stakeholders like the United Way of Perth-Huron, who are making significant efforts to address homelessness and the challenges in our community. Madam Speaker, now, Mr. Speaker, I spoke with folks at the local community food centre. I always enjoy stopping by the local community food centre because I always feel like it's walking into a giant kitchen and chatting with people around a giant kitchen table. And I spoke to a couple of folks who were there enjoying the community meals, who could not afford their rent. They could not afford the skyrocketing rents that they see in our communities. And unfortunately, this is happening across the country, not just in large urban centres, but in small town and rural communities like those in Perth-Wellington. A few short years ago, it would have been unthinkable that in a place like Stratford or a place like Listowel in North Perth, there would be encampments. But yet, here in 2024, after 9 years of this government, we see encampments in these small town, rural communities. This summer, I was able to speak with family members whose loved ones couldn't find a place to live, who lacked the supportive housing that was necessary for them to be able to excel and to survive in our communities. I spoke with service providers who talked about the long wait lists to access the services that they provide. And I spoke with those who provide food for those in need. And they are experiencing the challenge because at the same time that demand is up for their services, the ability of those in our community to give is down. It's down because money is tight. It's down because it's a challenge to make ends meet. And unfortunately, there's a lot more month left at the end of the paycheck. And that's the challenges that we're facing in our communities across this country. And of course, I also engage regularly with municipalities. Municipalities that are ready and able, or are ready and willing to do their part, but unfortunately are not finding a partner in this government. I want to give one example, and that is the Housing Accelerator Fund. Not a single community in Perth-Wellington and in most small town and rural communities across this country received a cent, not 1 cent, from the Housing Accelerator Fund. And one of the reasons, Mr. Speaker, is because small rural communities like the township of Mapleton were considered to be large urban municipalities. Small town, rural communities, farming communities with populations slightly over 10,000 were being lumped in as large urban municipalities, having to compete for funds against the Mississaugas, the Torontos, the Ottawas, the Hamiltons of the world. These small town rural communities are desperate to do the work necessary to make sure that everyone has a roof over their heads. But the challenge is that they're not eligible for these programs because the government is making it impossible to access funds like large rural municipalities. And you know, Mr. Speaker, you know who else knows about these challenges? The member from Parry Sound, Muskoka, with whom I will be splitting my time. As our Shadow Minister for Housing, he came to Perth-Wellington this summer and spoke with key stakeholders about the efforts that we can make together to address the challenges of those experiences homelessness. Unfortunately, the Minister of Housing himself is asleep at the switch and is not putting in the efforts necessary so we can build the homes so that everyone has a place to call home. Now, Mr. Speaker, now that I've given the local context about why this is important, I want to address the report itself. The Auditor General's 5th report addressing chronic homelessness in Canada. And like I said, Mr. Speaker, this is truly a damning report. The Auditor General in her report found, and I quote, "Overall, Infrastructure Canada, Employment and Social Development Canada, and the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation did not know whether their efforts improved housing outcomes for people experiencing homelessness or chronic homelessness and for other vulnerable groups." Mr. Speaker, this government claimed to be investing, but has no clue. They have no clue what is happening on the ground. What's more, the Auditor General went on to say, the department did not know whether chronic homelessness and homelessness had increased or decreased since 2019 as a result of the investment. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the report found that despite being the lead for the National Housing Strategy and overseeing the majority of its funding, the Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation took the position that it was not directly accountable for addressing chronic homelessness. Infrastructure Canada was also of the view that while it contributed to reducing chronic homelessness, it was not solely responsible for achieving the strategy's target of reducing chronic homelessness. So, Mr. Speaker, we have federal departments and agencies who are claiming to be making investments to address the significant challenges of chronic homelessness and those experiencing homelessness in Canada, but yet they have no clue what's happening. And, Mr. Speaker, in committee, we pressured the department to give us answers. And finally, at a second meeting it took, the Deputy Minister, Kelly Gillis of Infrastructure Canada, stated that the department had recently reported a 12% increase in homelessness in Canada. An increase for a government that's claiming to cut chronic homelessness in half by 2027. They're starting already in this year with a 12%, according to Infrastructure Canada, increase. But, Mr. Speaker, if we look at the PBO's report from earlier this year, from May 22nd, 2024, the PBO writes, and I quote, "Since 2018, the number of homeless people has increased by 20%. 20%. And they go on to write, PBO goes on to write, the number of chronically homeless people had increased by 38% since 2018. 38%. When we're seeing an effort, when we ought to see an effort to decrease chronic homelessness, this government has overseen an increase, a 38% increase in chronic homelessness since 2018. Not only is this unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, it is unacceptable to the families and to the loved ones across this country who are experiencing homelessness, who are losing hope that they will ever find a place to call home, a place with four walls, a safe place in a safe community. Mr. Speaker, This is unacceptable, and the Auditor General has confirmed this. Our committee report in the Public Accounts Committee has confirmed this. Action that this government promised to take hasn't happened, and that is why we are moving concurrence in this debate today. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.